Today, I want to discuss the topic of religious abuse. I've kind of put this one off for a little while because I don't really like doing controversial videos. However, because this is a group that focuses on abuse, I don't want to pretend like this one doesn't exist. I want to start off by going over the signs of religious abuse, or the signs that you may have a narcissistic pastor or leader. However, this does not really cover the sadistic churches that focus more on ritual abuse. Okay, so the signs that you may be in religious abuse or have a narcissistic preacher or leader. A narcissistic leader or preacher will point out the sins or flaws in others, but if you call them out on their own, they will get angry or defensive. A narcissistic preacher or leader is more concerned about how the church looks to others than the well-being of the members. I had one person tell me that they went to a church and they would come to church right after work, so they didn't have time to change in between by the time they got there. I think the singing had already started, and so they would come straight from work and go into the sanctuary. The pastor had asked this person to change their clothes before they come in because they were wearing pants and not a dress. They expressed to the pastor they didn't have time, and the pastor let them know that either they could change their clothes or they were not welcome back at the church. This is an example of caring more about what the church looks like than caring about the actual members themselves. A narcissistic preacher or leader will use church structure and sermons to support themselves. Okay, so this is one I haven't ever talked about. I went to a church and was on the leadership board, and in this church, they decided to set up a CrossFit gym in the sanctuary. So we were told that this gym was going to be used as a ministry. There was never any type of vote or anything done on it to see if we agreed to move it into the sanctuary. So one Sunday we come in and there is a CrossFit gym in the sanctuary. You know, the bars were bolted into the ground. It was like a full-on gym in the sanctuary. So the leaders and members were pretty passive about it at first until, we were told this was going to be used as a ministry, but then we would bring people in and tell them about the new CrossFit ministry, and they were playing music that had drug references. We're talking about sex. I mean, we would go in there and listen to Snoop Dogg or whatever. And I noticed when other preachers would come in, the preacher would shut off the music really quickly and tell us to play something different. But as long as there wasn't another spiritual leader in there, it was okay. At the time, I was highly religious and involved in church, and I mentioned to the preacher, this isn't okay. This makes us look bad. First of all, we're playing this type of music in the sanctuary. And second of all, the only time you ever see Jesus lose his temper in the Bible is when they're running a business out of the church. The preacher gets very upset with me over bringing this to the attention of the other leaders in the church, and makes the comment that if I get CrossFit removed from the church, that he hopes that I can come up with $1,500 a month to replace how much we're going to be losing when we take CrossFit out of there. He then does a meeting, and in the meeting, he tears me apart. It was so bad that we had almost every leader in the church end up leaving the church after the meeting. I think only 2 remained at the church. He brought up my clothing. He said that I could no longer mentor the children in the church. I took the teenagers home on the weekends. This was something I did outside of the church. He took me out of drama team, and I was no longer allowed to play in the band. I did piano for the church. He literally stripped me of everything for bringing attention to this. And then he also took me out of a leadership position. So, as if that wasn't enough, we come into church the following Sunday, and he prepared a whole sermon for me, targeted at me, called The Jezebel Spirit. This pastor tore me apart. And then after that, I left the church, and, we never went back there. But this is an example of how a pastor will use a sermon to target one person. A narcissistic preacher or leader misuses the Bible to defend themselves. This means if they offend someone in the church or abuse someone in the church, then they manipulate and twist scripture to make it back them up. In a church with a narcissistic preacher or leaders, the leader or the preacher's way is the only right way. And if you disagree, you are in the wrong and not in alignment with God. An example of this is when I was younger and we were in church, on Halloween, we would have to watch a video on children and women being sacrificed, and we would have to watch the horrible, horrific rituals that took place on Halloween. But we were still allowed to celebrate. We would do hay rides at the church. The church members would bring in bags of candy for us children. We were allowed to dress up, but it had to be as Bible characters, but we were still allowed to celebrate. Now, the other day I seen a post on Facebook where this same preacher has changed his mind, and now he's no longer supporting that at all. And in his post on Facebook, he clearly states, if you are a professed Christian and you are carving pumpkins, you are trick-or-treating or giving out candy or dressing up, and you are actively participating in Satan worship. He then goes on to say that you are dishonoring God and bringing shame to his name, and by doing so is a sin. Now, if you were to go to this pastor and express your feelings and plead your case, you would not be heard. A narcissistic preacher or leader will criticize others, but fail to see anything wrong with themselves. They can gossip about others, but they use it as a way of praying for someone. So it would be like the preacher coming to members of the church and gossiping about the other members and then saying, well, I'm only telling you this because we need to pray for this person. A narcissistic preacher or leader can be manipulative. A narcissistic preacher or leader can be entitled. A narcissistic preacher or leader can want to be seen. They can be communal narcissists and get supply off of their good deeds, so they make sure that their good deeds are noticed. Their home life with their spouses and children can be very toxic, or there can be abuse in the home. If you go up against the narcissistic preacher or leader, you have now become the problem. If you address the other leaders with an issue concerning this narcissistic preacher or leader, they may shame you, gaslight you, or guilt you for even questioning or going up against the narcissistic preacher. A narcissistic leader or preacher will cover up abuse that is taking place in the church. Now, when I was younger, there was a man in our church that did abuse a little girl. She was under the age of 7. And I do remember the pastor and the leaders having this man leave the church, but at no point was this man ever reported. The police were not involved in what was going on in the church. Now, before you think that I'm just putting religion down, I want to say religion served a major purpose in my life at one point. I, however, also believe, though, that so did drug addiction. Just as religion helped form who I am today, and I also believe drug addiction also helped form who I am today. I believe one of the biggest problems with religion today is that leaders or other members of the church or Christians have made themselves your judge, and you cannot judge a life that you haven't lived. When I was in active addiction, I was told that if I didn't change and get my life together and I were to overdose and die, I would go straight to hell. To them, I was getting off the path, but to me, I feel that drug addiction was a very important part of my path. However, it may have been a very rocky part. It was still a crucial part of my journey. a part that I was meant to take. And let me tell you why I feel this way. So let's say you have someone struggling with addiction and they reach out to a member of the church, someone that is highly religious and judgmental. This person is not going to have an understanding of their struggles and what led to their addiction. They're going to be more judgmental about their circumstances and tell them things like I was told, if you die, you would go to hell, and try to use hell as a tool to put fear in them, hoping fear will cause them to get sober. But if you work with someone like me to try to overcome drug addiction, I have the tools that could help you overcome it, because I have been at rock bottom and I brought myself up out of it and I did overcome it. Also, because I have been at rock bottom, I can't judge you for your circumstances. I feel that while church can be very helpful for many, religion can be very damaging for others. And just because you're religious does not mean that you have a deep, close, personal relationship with God. I think sometimes in religion, people get so caught up in the rules of it that they lose sight of God. If you follow religion or the Bible, then you know you can't read the Bible and find anywhere where it talks about Jesus following religion. He did quite the opposite. He continuously went up against religious leaders, and it was because of religious leaders that he was crucified. To them, he was in the wrong for healing the sick and the blind because he was doing these things on the Sabbath. But in Jesus's eyes, it didn't matter what day he did it on. His intentions, his heart were in the right place. He seen people hurting and he wanted to help. But because of religion, it cost him his life. I think you still see this in religion today, that these are the rules. If you don't apply these to your life and live by this standard, you're in the wrong. But realistically, it is impossible to live a life by these religious standards, because literally everything is a sin. You can have Bible scholars and scientists and Christians all read the same verses out of the Bible, and they can all give you a very different perception of what those scriptures mean. But in religious abuse, someone has read these scriptures, they interpreted them or twisted or manipulated them for whatever way benefits them, and now you are expected to conform to their belief system. They have decided that your perception is wrong and their way is the only right way. And if you choose not to conform to this belief system, then you will be punished by the church or the pastor himself. And they do this by putting you out of the church or bashing you to other members of the church to the point where you want to leave. I read a post on Facebook the other day, and this goes back to the being judgmental. The post said, if you leave a church because of its members, then you're following the people and you're not following God. And so many people commented, amen, preach, brother. And I really thought about that. And we will tell our children to separate themselves from certain types of people because you become what you're around. But we teach people that in religion, you don't get to use discernment and you don't get to not want to be around certain types of people. If you are in a church where there's emotional abuse and religious abuse and manipulation, that you're not allowed to say, hey, I'm leaving this church because of the people in the church. And you need to have some level of agreement with the person that is preaching to you. I'm now going to go over some of the most common signs to let you know if you have been through religious trauma. People may have suggested to you or convinced you that any sicknesses you have, such as cancer, were brought on by your lack of faith. You have chronic feelings of unworthiness, loss of church, family, or community. You've been told that you should hate the sin but love the abuser or the sinner. This is toxic forgiveness. You are told that this person hurt you and they repeatedly hurt you, and it's okay to hate what they're doing, but you are required to love them. And that may take time. That doesn't always happen right away. It depends on what this person done to you, but that doesn't mean that you are supposed to just be dismissive of it and open up your heart to them and love them. This is toxic forgiveness. You have been shamed or exiled over things like having an abortion. You have experienced emotional, physical, or sexual abuse by church leaders. You have anxiety over church or the Bible. You have self-hatred. You have, or in the past, you have had a fear or anxiety around hell, Satan, demons, or salvation. You see this more when you have people coming out of a church where they preach nothing but hell, fire, and brimstone. You deny your sexuality and feel shame over whom you are attracted to. Okay, God is love. And when you have people who have had an abortion or considering it, or people that are homosexual, to shame them and guilt them and punish them, God is not in that. You have fear of being rejected by God. You are a perfectionist due to fear of making mistakes. You yourself have black and white thinking, judging others' actions as good or bad. You have put unrealistic expectations on yourself as a husband or wife. You stay in abuse with your spouse because of religious beliefs on divorce. You can have a grandiose sense of self due to your knowledge on the Bible. Okay, so if you feel like you have been or you are in religious abuse, what can you do about it? The first thing you can do is walk away from this toxic environment altogether. Now, if you choose to go to another church where you feel like it is benefiting you and you're getting something out of it, that is great. I went through a period where I told God, I'm going to just have a relationship with you. I'm not going to sit in a church week after week and listen to someone else tell me their perception of you. But I'm going to show up every single day, not once a week on Sunday. Every day I'm showing up for prayer and for meditation, and I'm not going to read my Bible. I'm not going back to church. Now, in that year that I did this, there were times where I decided I wanted to listen to motivational speeches, and I would listen to T.D. Jakes, Steve Frederick, or Joel Osteen. And so that did encourage me a lot, but I don't think I ever just sit down and listen to like full sermons. I would also still listen to praise and worship music a lot. I felt that I connected very strongly with God through music, so I did have times where I would just get into the music and feel his presence and spend time with him. After a year of doing this, my relationship with God got so close because I feel like prayer is communicating with God, but meditating is listening to God, quieting the mind so you could receive messages from God. And then after a year of doing this, I never went back to the way things were. I felt my relationship gotten so close with him, I just couldn't go back to the way things were. So if you've been through religious abuse, you need to go somewhere where you are not being guilted. That's a huge thing. Go somewhere where you are free to have a belief system of your own and you're not being manipulated or having someone try to change that. And there are some good churches that are beneficial. So put yourself somewhere like that where it feels safe to you and you're not triggered at all. If you are not ready for that, though, there's nothing wrong with taking time away from church and figuring out what your relationship with God is and what your beliefs are. And next, let go of guilt and judgment. Guilt is a negative emotion that keeps you beat down and stuck. You can, however, feel remorse, because with remorse, you feel sorry for your actions and you're not so beat down that you can't do something about them. But guilt tells you that you're bad. And if you stay beat down with guilt, you're going to stay stuck in guilt. Again, I cannot stress this enough. My intentions with this video is not to beat down church. However, I do see enough religious abuse in my line of work that I can't ignore this topic. It does happen, and it happens quite a bit. And if you choose to walk away from it or to get out of it, you're not a bad person. You're not a bad Christian, and you're not going to hell.